Okay, so Baldur's Gate 3, this is probably my most played game on this list, and I think it's actually one of the best games of the last 5 years. The story just pulls you in and doesn't let go with these amazing characters you meet along the way, and the world is massive and so much fun to explore. You can wander around for hours and hours and still find something new, and the open world is packed with secrets and surprises. It's got that classic Dungeons and Dragons feel, but with really cool modern graphics. And the combat is turn-based, which I know can be a turn-off for some people, but honestly, it just works perfectly and gives you time to really think about your moves. I just love how much freedom you have in this game to create your own character and story. Okay, so Celeste is a game that I've heard a ton about and finally decided to try out. Now, it might not be for everyone because the graphics are kinda simple and it's definitely a challenging platformer. I'm talking jumping puzzles that'll really test your patience and make you want to throw your controller across the room. I put in a good 5 or 6 hours, and while I didn't finish it, I get why people love it. The controls are super tight and responsive, which is awesome because when you mess up, you know it's your fault. The story is actually pretty interesting too, dealing with stuff like anxiety and overcoming your fears. Plus, the music is seriously amazing and really sets the mood. If you're into those hardcore platformers that make you work for every victory and you don't mind the retro look, Celeste might be right up your alley. Okay, so I jumped into Death Stranding, and honestly, at first I was like, what am I even doing? You're basically this delivery guy just walking around this crazy landscape carrying tons of stuff and trying not to fall over, which is way harder than it sounds. There are these weird invisible monsters that try to grab you, and you have to hold your breath to avoid them, which is kind of creepy. I will say the story is pretty wild and the world is really interesting to explore, but it definitely gets a bit repetitive. I mean, some might call this game a walking simulator, which it probably is, and it might not be for everyone, as a lot of people might find it boring. But there's something about it that just kept me going, like I had to see what was next and where this crazy story was going. Plus, the graphics are insane and the soundtrack is amazing, so that definitely helped keep me hooked.
Opa, bora lá.
Okay, so I finally got around to playing Final Fantasy VII Rebirth. And let me tell you, it was like stepping back into a world I knew and loved, but with a whole new perspective. Remember all those awesome moments from the original? Well, they're back, but with even more depth and detail. And the story goes in some crazy directions that I totally didn't see coming. I got so attached to the characters this time around, like they felt like old friends. And the combat kept me on my toes with all the different strategies and abilities you can use. Honestly, I did get a little lost in those massive dungeons sometimes, and the story kind of dragged in a few places, but overall it was an amazing experience that brought back so many memories and made me fall in love with Final Fantasy VII all over again. If you're a fan of the original, you owe it to yourself to check out Rebirth.
Bring it!
The place is coming down!
Okay.
Okay, so I finally got my hands on Indiana Jones and the Great Circle, and wow, this game is a wild ride from start to finish. You get to explore all these amazing locations like ancient temples and hidden cities, and the puzzles are really clever. I spent hours trying to figure some of them out. The story is super exciting too, with plenty of twists and turns that kept me guessing the whole time, plus the graphics are incredible. It actually feels like you're in a classic Indiana Jones movie. The combat can be a little clunky at times, though, and I wish there were more enemy variety because after a while it starts to feel a bit repetitive.
Should have left this alone.
Yeah? Well, I should have done a lot of things.
But honestly, those are just minor nitpicks in an otherwise awesome game. If you're a fan of Indiana Jones or just love a good action adventure, then you definitely need to check this one out. All right, so I jumped into Metaphor Refantasio, and honestly, I was pretty surprised. Now, I am not a big anime fan, but I'll try to be unbiased in my review and say that this game is actually really good. I played for around 10 hours, and I must say that the gameplay is really amazing.
凍らせてやる。
弱点に命中。
大丈夫。やれるよ。
It's got this unique turn-based combat system that keeps you thinking strategically with every move, and the story is surprisingly deep with some really interesting characters that you actually start to care about. The world is beautifully designed too. It's like stepping into a vibrant anime movie, but I I will say that the graphics might not be for everyone, and I did find myself getting a little lost sometimes, because the map can be kind of confusing, but overall, I'm really enjoying Metaphor Refantasio, and I think it's definitely worth checking out, even if you're not usually into anime games. Ori and the Will of the Wisps is seriously one of the most beautiful games I've ever played, and I'm not exaggerating when I say I've finished it 3 times already. Everything about it is just stunning, from the hand-painted art style to the incredible soundtrack, and the story is so emotional and captivating that I was hooked from beginning to end. You play as this little spirit named Ori, and you have to explore this huge world and solve all sorts of puzzles and fight enemies to save the forest. The movement and combat are so fluid and satisfying, and there are tons of abilities and upgrades to unlock, so it never gets boring. Honestly, the only bad thing I can say about this game is that it can be pretty challenging at times, and I definitely died a lot, but it was always worth it to see what was around the next corner. If you're looking for a game with a beautiful world, a touching story, and amazing gameplay, then you absolutely need to check out Ori and the Will of the Wisps. Okay, so I just finished playing Prince of Persia: The Lost Crown last week, and man, this game is fantastic. It totally takes me back to the old school Prince of Persia games with the awesome platforming and crazy traps, but it also has this really cool new art style that pops. The combat is super smooth too, with tons of different moves and combos to master, plus you can find all sorts of cool weapons and abilities as you explore. And the story is actually really engaging with some fun twists and turns. I got totally sucked in. I will say that some of the platforming challenges can be pretty tough, but that just makes it even more satisfying when you finally nail them. Honestly, I haven't had this much fun with a Prince of Persia game in years, so if you're looking for a challenging and rewarding action platformer, definitely give The Lost Crown a try. Senua's Saga Hellblade 2 is seriously intense. I mean, seriously, this game is not for the faint of heart. The story is gripping, and the way it tackles mental health is really something else.
What have you done? Stop. Please help!
You're right there with Senua, battling her inner demons, and the voices in her head are so realistic, it's actually kind of unsettling. The combat is brutal too, and you really have to be strategic to survive. I found myself holding my breath during some of the bigger fights, but what really blew me away were the visuals. The environments are stunning, and the way they blend reality with Senua's perceptions is just incredible. I found myself stopping to admire the scenery all the time, which I don't usually do in games. Honestly, Hellblade 2 is more than just a game, it's an experience. It's definitely challenging and emotionally draining, but it's also incredibly rewarding. If you're looking for something different and thought-provoking, then this is the game for you. Space Marine 2 is an absolute blast from start to finish. It's everything I wanted in a sequel, with even bigger battles and even more satisfying combat. Ripping and tearing through hordes of orcs with an arsenal of awesome weapons never gets old, and the new jump pack adds a whole new level of mobility and mayhem to the gameplay. Plus, the story is surprisingly engaging with some epic moments that really got me pumped up. Now the environments can feel a bit repetitive at times, and the AI isn't always the sharpest, but honestly, those are minor gripes in an otherwise action-packed experience. If you're looking for a game that lets you unleash your inner badass and just have fun, then Space Marine 2 is definitely worth checking out.